So let's try and solve the problems of the 41st millennium by throwing more Space Marines at them. Today we're going to be talking about the biggest Horde Marine list we can field, and one army with 119 Space Marines. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where today, in a bit of a follow-up to our Hordes video that we did a week or so back, I thought it would be fun to see just how many Space Marines we could fit into one army list. This was partly inspired by one of my Patreon supporters, who messaged me with a Black Templars army list, and in particular this reminded me of just how cheap Black Templars Crusader Squad Marines can be. For some reason in one of the recent FAQs they went down to just 15 points per model. I believe 3 points cheaper than any other Space Marine with 2 wounds and power armour, and honestly just for their raw profile alone they're really not too bad point for point. For 15 points you get an angry Space Marine with toughness 4, a 3+ armour and 2 wounds, and 3 attacks with shock assault at strength 4 AP -1 with their Astartes chainsword. Certainly not the biggest threat to tanks and heavies, but if we just overload the enemy with excessive amounts of power armour, likely some Templars are going to get through into melee, and at the very least they should gum up all the objectives in the midboard for the majority of the game. In this video we'll just take a look at a couple of army lists that I've been messing around with this theme, and then talk about Horde style Marine lists and whether they could actually be any good competitively. So here I believe is the maximum number of Space Marines that you can fit into one 2000 point army list, presuming we're not counting scouts or neophytes, which would bump the numbers up a little, but seeing as they're 14 points when Crusader squads are 15, I feel like you're getting a lot less bang for your buck if you're not getting 2 wounds and you're not getting power armour for just 1 point. In any case, this Black Templars Horde list is arranged into a battalion, a patrol and an auxiliary support detachment, led by 3 lieutenants as the cheapest HQ the Black Templars can field, and leading 10 units of 10-man Crusader squads, fairly arbitrarily 6 with chainswords and bolt pistols, 4 with bolters, and then 2 units of assault squads on foot, also armed with chainswords, just to absolutely double down on the chainsword wielding zealots that are charging straight at the enemy. Obviously having just 3 of the very cheapest HQ is unlikely to be the most optimal build, but I did try to give the lieutenants at least something useful. One's a bit of a fighty one with the Imperium's sword and the Teeth of Terror for a bucket load of general purpose attacks, and one's a bit more of a buffing commander with frontline commander with +1 to advance and charge, and the Crusader helm to put 1 big squad in assault doctrine each turn. With this many chainswords and Space Marines, I think that the list will do quite well against Horde type armies, though they'll really struggle against anything elite with good saves or high toughness. We're literally putting down over 240 wounds of Space Marines on the table, which is going to be pretty impossible to remove in the first few turns, and should guarantee at least some Space Knights making it through to melee. I did try and make a list that's a little bit more toned down, and maybe goes a bit more heavy on the support characters, which with so many bodies is probably sensible. In this one we still have 99 Marines on the table, mainly substituted out for some excellent buffing characters who can actually make our chainsword wielding squads legitimately scary. Grimaldus can give squads nearby exploding 6s, and have 2 very powerful litanies to play with. Helbrecht will give you 4 rerolls to hit for a unit, and also +1 strength for the chainswords nearby. Strength 5 is very nice to have. And we've still got a lieutenant for reroll wounds, and a chief apothecary with selfless healer and the Crusader helm to put 1 squad in assault doctrine and hand out some feel no pains. For the Crusader squads themselves, we've given each advancing squad a power fist, just to give them a bit more of a heavy punch in melee and allow them to tangle with heavy hitters a bit better. And there's a few elites bounding up the table in a squad of 5 Vanguard veterans, all armed with lightning claws and storm shields. It's probably a slightly more sensible list than the first. We have lost some bodies, but at least those bodies are far more effective on the table, and probably more durable too, with Grimaldus and the Apothecary around for feel no pains. So could these huge Marine Horde lists be good? To be honest, though they do have their positives, I think there are reasons why we haven't seen them on the table so much so far. The main advantage is that you have a massive overload of 1 profile, you can get 200+ wounds of toughness 4 and 3+ armor saves, and hopefully that should be far more than the opponent's damage 2 weaponry can really cope with. The vast majority of the list is all OBSEC as well, very important for primary missions, and it's quite cool to be able to have a Horde list that's actually really quite punchy in its own right. Every unit in the list can deal with light infantry really quite well. Crusader squads are decent point for point, I think. They compete very nicely with competitive units such as intercessors. Obviously not quite as threatening individually, but you get far more of them because there's so many fewer points. On top of this, I think the Black Templars are quite a good chapter to run them as. They've got some good stratagems, including Devout Push, which could be really handy for a Horde list like this with limited mobility, and some really nice litany support with their chaplains, very reliably getting them off and getting a 5+ feel no pain on certain units when they need it. I would also say it's perhaps not the easiest army to pick secondaries against. You can potentially go for characters, I guess, but even then, even on the second list, you're not going to score max points, and that assumes that you pretty much table the list and wipe out all the characters. On the downside though, I would say that Horde Marines don't tend to be quite as good a skew list as things like true really big hordes with loads and loads of models, or having every target being excessively tough with good saves. The thing is, while toughness 4 and a 3+ armor save can be difficult to deal with, most weapons are at least somewhat effective against it. Neither anti-infantry weapons nor anti-tank weapons will really be wasted against the profile. They won't be super effective, such as damage 2 weapons will, but they're still going to add in quite nicely. The Black Templars might be a bit more mobile than some chapters for this type horde. They get to re-roll their advance rolls, and they can get one unit to advance and charge as well if they need to, but even so, the list is going to have limited mobility, where every single unit is in theory moving 6 inches if they want to be able to attack. They won't really be able to pick and choose their battles against anything, and if your opponent puts a problematic unit right up front and centre, then the Templars aren't going to have much choice but to charge it, even if it's not a very good matchup for them. You do also risk the most important and threatening unit being focused down with enemy fire each turn. Even if the opponent can only kill 10 or 20 Space Marines in a turn, then they will likely be the 10 or 20 Space Marines that were in best strike range for you or holding a key objective. Finally, the damage output from the list really is quite skewed. It's going to be very good against light infantry with all those chainsword attacks, but against elite durable armies such as Custodes, Death Guard, or perhaps Dark Angels, they might really be in trouble. Chainswords just aren't going to do all that much against them, and if they are charging at any sort of elite melee infantry, numbers aren't really going to stop them from getting blended in return fairly well. Fast hard-hitting units from other Space Marines could be really annoying for the list. So overall, I think a Horde Marine list with tons of bodies could be really quite interesting and a really different way to play the faction, and even potentially in some competitive matchups you could surprise the opponent with a very weird unit profile and perhaps even pull out some wins. I certainly don't think it's one of the strongest things for Marines though, to be honest. Some more elite units with power weapons and storm shields really can concentrate the damage output a bit better and are far more likely to be the way to go for a dedicated melee list. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. It was fun to have a bit of a thought experiment anyway, and think about putting a crazy ton of power armor down on the table. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. Usually I try and do a bit more sensible 40k tactics, but every so often I do quite like exploring fun list ideas and concepts. If you have been enjoying a lot of the videos recently, I would just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. Making all these YouTube videos does take a fair amount of time, so if you are enjoying regularly, any support is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the channel's monthly prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.